Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Hello, everybody. You are very welcome to a new episode of Redefining CyberSecurity here on the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network. More specifically, the CISO Circuit series that I have the pleasure of co-hosting with my good friend, Michael Piacente. Michael, it's good to see you.
You too. How you doing, Sean? Happy New Year.
Yes, Happy New Year. We got a couple out before the end of the year last year, and we're kicking 24 off with a bang today. And we have two good topics we're going to talk about with a special guest who's done quite a bit to help the community understand what's going on with security, how to talk about it with each other, and up and down the executive stack, if you will. So those are the kind of topics we're going to be digging into today. And for everybody knows, this show is all about communicating and operating security in support of a business that hopefully drives revenue as we protect it, but also does well for the community and society as a whole. So hopefully we get to some of those points today. Michael, a few words to remind everybody who you are, and then I'll leave the pleasure of introducing Don. People see Don there, but people listening don't know that Don's on yet. So why don't you share a few words about what you're up to, Michael, and then do the honors, please.
Yeah, sure. Michael Piacente, managing partner and co-founder of Hitch Partners. We're an executive, kind of a curated executive search firm focused in the cybersecurity leadership space, primarily CISOs and BISOs and deputies, where most people know us from. And what do we have going? It's an interesting year. We can always get into the market stuff, but on the initiative side, we have our fun national U.S. compensation and trends report coming out in about a month, I think, late February. So we're excited about that and see what trends persisted, what new trends exist. So it's a fun time of the year for us, a little bit of a crazy time actually as well, as many people went away for the holidays, doing a little bit of soul searching on their career objectives, companies as well. You have the SEC final rule went into place on December 18th. So it's been a little bit of a perfect storm for us the last couple of weeks, but great to be here. This is actually definitely the best part of my day to come and speak with you fine gentlemen. So without further ado, let me introduce Don Boian, and I'll go through how I know Don as well, but just a little bit about his background. So Don's a highly accomplished IT and security technology leader. Award-winning as well. He runs information security compliance and risk for a biotech startup called Hound Labs. He's been there a few years and built it from scratch. Prior to that, he built out actually multiple functions and a highly diverse team at Huntington Bank. For those who don't know Huntington Bank, it's based in Columbus, Ohio. It's think almost 200 billion in assets, and I think it's the 17th largest bank in the U.S. If I'm not mistaken on those. Don, you can correct me if I'm not. But he implemented a number of security programs really designed to protect that enterprise from communications and systems and assets. So, but interestingly enough, even though Don has now been with a startup, has built out a large financial institution. He also spent 30 years at the NSA. Actually retired as a defense intelligence senior executive, working both offensive and defensive cyber ops. He had done a lot of things there, which I'll let him get into, all things I can't tell you because he'll kill me. But he was also a cyber consultant for the U.S. Department of Energy for 6 years. Don's been super active in the community. He serves on the board for the NTSC, which Don graciously introduced me to, and the great team over there. If you don't know the NTSC, definitely check them out. Very fascinating organization. He does a lot of non-for-profit and advisory boards. and has a whole list of awards, which are incredibly impressive. Most of all, we'll say that Don's also kind of a double EE, MS from Johns Hopkins and bachelor's of EE from OSU. So go Blue Jays, go Hawkeyes. I met Don in Columbus, Ohio, like probably 8 or 9 years ago, which, by the way, for random facts, is also the birthplace of Hitch Partners, the Marriott in downtown Columbus, Ohio. But we were co-hosting one of our CISO sanctuary dinners with a local VC there in Columbus. Don was part of that roundtable. Since then we've remained in touch, and just he has an extraordinary story. But I've also found Don to always be a strong and very pleasant advocating voice for the community. So I am super thrilled to have him as a guest today. And thanks for being here, Don. Hopefully I didn't mess that up too bad.
You didn't. An exceptionally kind introduction. I appreciate it. Thank you. I guess I'll give my really quick pitch around the National Technology Security Coalition, which is
awesome.
the NTSC organization that Michael talked about. It's really the voice of the CISO on Capitol Hill. I got involved with that organization, I think it was 6 or 7 years or so ago, and have been on it since. It's really CISOs who are trying to make sure that when nationally we put together legislation on cybersecurity, it makes sense and it can be implemented. And in fact, we've had fun, and it's challenging sometimes, as any of you who work legislative types of things know. Getting anything through Capitol Hill is a challenge to begin with, but complex things like cybersecurity make it even more challenging. And you find out that both congressional leaders and staffs don't necessarily know what all those things mean. So when they start throwing out ideas about incident notification to the SEC or some other regulatory body, they aren't necessarily practitioners, so they don't quite know what that means. And when we say, hey, you realize we deal with incidents as CISOs day in and day out, sometimes with large organizations, huge volumes of incidents. So trying to put some sanity to that. It's a fun organization. I get experience sitting down with congressional staffs and congressional members, talking to them about cybersecurity issues, which is fascinating. But it's also a great group of individuals. And quite frankly, from a peer group, you can't really beat the group of folks in CISOs there. So that's NTSC. If you're interested, check it out, ntsc.org.
Yeah, Don, thanks for covering that. I've had an amazing experience with Patrick and the crew over there. They are absolutely incredible individuals, super interesting, and I learned a ton just in the short tenure that I've been helping out. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Don, because I mean, I read the bio, and there's so much stuff in there, and Michael did a great job in kind of painting a picture for you. But I'd like a few words from you on, is there a defining moment in your career where you can say something big happened, either to yourself, to the program, to the role of the CISO, to something that you can say, this changed the way we look at things today?
I'll make that one personal, I think. And I think my answer to that question really is probably a change that happened in my government years in my career. And I'll give you a few examples. It's defining us and them properly. Because I think humans are classic. We're always, there's always us, our team, and them. And I think early on in my career in the government, there was always some, what I'll refer to as interagency rivalry, right? It's we're the good agency, they're the bad agency kind of thing. And sometimes you take that way too far. And if you define us and them properly, as I did, I would like to say the second half of my government career, then we're all on the same team. We're all working for the same government. We're all part of the United States. We should be pushing the same way, and we should be cooperating, not arguing with each other. And honestly, I've used that same philosophy when I went to private industry. When I worked in a large bank, it wasn't the marketing won't let me, produce the following, or this business segment is producing things without security checking in on it, stuff like that. I ended up, trying to help my team decide, hey, they're not the enemy, right? We're all on the same team here. Let's figure out a way through it and let's work through it. And I think actually that philosophy, I think we're going to talk about a little bit here when we start talking about, what sales and cybersecurity does and CISOs and cybersecurity do, and how the two potentially can work together. And we do need to work together a lot better on that. So I'd say that defining moment to me is really when it kind of clicked with me and I went, hey, wait a minute, us and them. There's lots of adversaries out there. Let's make that them. And the us piece is us all working together, figuring out a way through it. And we're going to disagree, but let's figure out a way through it.
Yeah. Yeah. There are probably countless examples we can pull on, each of us, the three, probably everybody listening as well. I mean, I can point back or look back to my days in engineering and quality assurance, where QA was QA and engineering, right? Or is it QA versus, right? Now it's security and app development, or is it security versus app development? I think countless stories like that. And when I switched, it's very interesting you went there, because my next point that I wanted to bring up was kind of, well, who are cybersecurity people selling to? And it's naturally, well, let's go to the CISO because they're at the top. But I've brought thousands and thousands, literally, of products to market. And as the companies I work with mature, they realize that there are multiple personas responsible for security. Yes, CISO sits there, but the CISO has peers. The CISO has a team. The CISO has a team that has peers, and some are users, some are key stakeholders, some are the benefactors, some are the teams that say that's the CISO's is the guy who says no all the time. So talk to me a little bit about how cybersecurity salespeople approach selling into an organization, because I often feel, like I said, that they start at the CISO and hope it's your job then to navigate stuff.
Yeah, and the CISO is usually a tough person to get a hold of, right? It's a tough person to pin down, or and you're right. There are multiple avenues to go there, especially in a large organization. When I worked at Huntington, we had 200 and some odd people in cybersecurity side of things. Quite frankly, selling to one of the folks who worked for me in security engineering or some other area was honestly just as valuable, if not more valuable, even though I had the power of the pen and it was my budget as the CISO, right? They still had to go through me. They still had to get my signature. But quite frankly, if you could get their buy-in, and you poked on something that's actually a very valuable lesson for folks in the sales side of things. If you can figure out a way to get a business segment in an organization and the security organization pushing the same way, again, back to that us and them, if you can get them both pushing the same way and both trying to bring your product on board, you're even better, right? Show that this will, obviously when I was with a bank, it was, reduce fraud or do something in that side of things, something where you can tie something together there. You've got a business case that's unstoppable, right? Then it's you differentiating yourself from other people who are out selling similar products. So, definitely don't just consider the CISO, but we're going to probably talk as we jump in here about kind of the do's and don'ts of, what works or what doesn't work. I'm obviously going to give it to you from the CISO side of things, and I'll probably share with you what I refer to as my tales of shame. And several approaches that have come towards me. So we can go over that. But what I really like focusing on a little bit more is that, here are the do's. Let's all laugh at the don'ts, because there are a bunch of them out there. But then let's move on to the do's. And I've actually given presentations before to entire sales organizations that are selling cybersecurity products to say, yeah, we've got to do this better. This partnership has to improve. So let's talk right.
Yeah,
let's go ahead and jump right into some of those, if you don't mind. And I guess the first thing I'll say is we really do need a healthy relationship here between sales and the CISO side of things, right? Let's figure out how to do that. But here's the important part I said in that key word in there is relationship. And we all know a relationship and getting your foot in the door with a CISO is difficult. There's lots of different ways to do that, I would say. I can throw some of them out. And things they need to think about. get involved with the local community. The one thing I absolutely love about cybersecurity is we have a fantastic community, and that community is, in multiple different, whether you go to some of the security conferences, whether you're a member of some of the, ISACA or ISSA, or, pick your SANS or pick your favorite kind of organization. They all are a great group of folks, and they're all willing to help each other out. And I'll be honest with you, actually, when I left the government and went to a bank, the first thing I thought was, I'll never ever have a chance to actually pick up the phone and talk to my competing bank's CISO. And the interesting thing was within a month of being on the job, I was picking up the phone and talking to somebody. And in fact, there was a shooting at another bank, and I knew it was directly at their office. And I picked up the phone and I'm like, "Are you guys okay down there?" So it's very fascinating to me that although we may be competitors in a market space, on the cybersecurity side of things, we're all one community. Sales and the folks who produce cybersecurity capabilities and defenses are just as much a part of that ecosystem as the CISO trying to defend things and their staff. So we've got to make this work, and we've got to make it work a lot better. So first of all, I'd say is establish that relationship. And everybody says, "Well, how do I get my foot in that door?" I can tell you a few things that don't work, or at least don't work for me. And I think they generally don't work for most of the other CISOs. A lot of the cold calls and cold emails, there's just because something pops up in my inbox. I mean, come on, we're all training people around phishing emails and everything else. You think just because you send an email into my inbox, all right, yeah, way to go, I want to buy your capability. It's probably not going to get me to establish that relationship. And I'll be honest with you, some of the intro lines that try and get your attention. In fact, I got one this week that said, "Final warning." And I looked at it and went, "Oh, final warning." No. Yeah. I had to kind of laugh at that. And I did add it to my folder of emails of shame, because I actually used a bunch of them. I cut out the names and redact them so you can't actually see what organizations they came from. But I put it on my presentations when I talk to sales folks. So cold calls, cold emails, they rarely work. The voicemails often either don't get listened to or, don't get return calls on that side of things. Some of the other stuff that I've seen is patronizing emails. I said the final warning one, but there are lots of other examples, or the ones where we're trying to bribe. And, CISOs, and Michael can tell you, and his compensation survey will prove that out. CISOs aren't generally low compensated individuals. So, your $25 Starbucks gift card probably isn't going to go a long ways to swaying me to either take your call or look at your product. You might be actually insulting me, right? But I will tell you here, I'll flip the coin on you to say there are a few folks that I've seen, and I will give credit to a peer of mine who does this. I won't name him, but the peer actually sets aside one day a month, and he has what he calls New Tech Day, right? And he allows vendors to, schedule a half an hour or an hour long call, and he actually has a fee for that. And what he makes you do, though, is donate that money to a charity of his choice. I thought it was a great idea, right? It allows him to survey the landscape and understand what new technologies out there and things that he should be focused on, but then also does a little good on the side there, gathering some funds from charity. So, if you had those sales dollars were burning a hole in your pocket and you wanted to give them to somebody, great, give them to a charity, and it got your foot in the door, and it might get you that second call back. Great opportunity on that side.
We're seeing at RSA and Black Hat, I'm involved in a lot of the pitch for charities as well, and that's a great way to give back to the community and learn at the same time. I love the fact that he's time blocking to do that. So kudos to him or her that's doing that. That's a great methodology that others should take note of that. So.
Yeah, I even saw one that actually was they were give to a local chapter of an information security organization that had a scholarship. So I was like, that's awesome. I might actually look forward to several of those calls if you're actually going to donate into that scholarship side of things. Another quick don't ambulance chase. We see that a lot in this industry, unfortunately. There's a lot of emails that go out right after, the next breach is publicized, and they send out that email that says, if you had just had our capabilities, right? If they would have had it, they wouldn't have had this problem. So, that's one of them that's just like, really?
Yeah, I think I was going to make a point there, Don, because I love that point. I also will warn CISOs not to do that too. So,
that is true. Well, any CISO that tries fear, uncertainty, and doubt and uses that fear as a motivator, that's not a very good senior executive, I'd say right there. You need to get them past that fear.
It's not even, there's that point too. The other one I see, especially with so many CISOs looking for new opportunities, is they'll see a breach that's public and they'll call someone like me and say, what do you know about what's going on with the replacement? And it's like, let's turn the tables for a minute. Like, if you were in that situation, would you want someone calling and knocking on the door? Like, let them figure through. And by the way, they've probably already figured it out if it's come out publicly anyway. But not to pick on them, but I probably got no less than 100 calls when Clorox went down about what's going on with the search, what's going on. And I wasn't even running the search, right? So it's like, So I think human nature tells us that there's, smoke, there's fire. We're going to go find out about that. I think it's a great life lesson for anyone, sales folks and CISOs and anyone in between, just not to ambulance chase, because it's not a good look, and it usually doesn't result in any positive outcomes anyway. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, I have seen on the positive side of this, I have seen when some of those breaches happen, I've seen the behind the scenes network with CISOs and security departments to say to each other, how can I help?
Yeah, that's outreach.
Yeah. And can I, is there something, can I send a few people over who sit in your SOC and monitor today's operations while you're focused on containing everything else? And I've engaged in that a little bit myself. I won't mention names or places, but after a breach, picked up the phone call at the request of a mentor of mine to say, hey, can you talk to this CISO and understand after a large breach how you guys are defending against this or what they should do? So absolutely, those are good. And there is a positive lining there. Definitely I've seen a lot of I mentioned the gift cards, but the trinkets. I had a funny story I was with Huntington, that vendor, and I don't even remember who it was, but they sent this huge box of these little tiny mini cupcakes. And interestingly enough, Huntington was real picky about how they did inbound mail. So I think those cupcakes, which had some gel packs or something trying to keep it cold, sat in our mail facility for at least a week. And I looked at it, and it was one of these very fancy cupcake places, right? I'm looking at it going, they spent a lot of money on this. And then I'm like, well, they only gave me like 2 dozen of these little tiny cupcakes. And I'm like, I've got 200 people. How am I going to hand all these out to folks? And I'm like, I can't even hand them out because they're probably bad at this point. So don't bother with that. If you want to do something like that, here's my positive side of it, and here's the do's side of it. If you have started a relationship with a company or the security department or the CISO, I recommend you offer to sponsor a lunch and learn, right? That sometimes is a much more palatable way for folks to bring it in. You can spend your dollars there. Even I'll give bonus points to the company who does the soft sell of their product, right? It's not, slides plastered with whatever it is, the company name and the company logo, but it's let's talk about how people are implementing zero trust. And here are 3 or 4 vendors who do it. Yes, we're one of them, but here are 3 or 4 vendors who do it, and the differences in those types of capabilities. You will get a whole lot of more credibility and trust. And that was the second part of that relationship piece. We're in the trust business, right? That's what cybersecurity is all about. And as a cybersecurity salesperson, you should really be establishing that trust as well. And part of that is being open and honest that, there are 3 other 4 competitors. Here's how we do ours better, right? You're always going to want to differentiate yourself, but don't ignore the fact that there are lots of other competitors out there. Actually use that to your advantage. Establish that relationship, build that trust.
And I want to pause you there on that, Don, because on your thoughts on this, because I see a lot of salespeople move from vendor to vendor to vendor, and I see security leaders move from gig to gig to gig, and they kind of continue to find each other from wherever
They do.
they are and wherever they land. And I have to believe that that's rooted in the trust, right?
It is.
Whatever you're selling, whatever you're selling, I trust you, and we'll see how it fits. Here's what I need. I trust you. Help me. And maybe you work with some partner or some other vendor. But so the trust is huge there, right?
It is. I would say both the sales and the sales engineers, the ones that I've established a trust with, are ones that will actually come back to me and say, I can't say this officially, but ours isn't the best product to buy for what you're trying to do right here, right? Yes, they lost a sale right then, but they gained 2 or 3 more down the road because I knew I could go to them. You know, I was going to get it straight. They were going to tell me. And in fact, many times, even when I did buy their product, they'd say, all right, here where the bumps in the road we're seeing from where we've implemented this at other customers. You know, and one of the things I think I talked with Michael at one point about was, you know, having white papers and things like that out there are wonderful, right? You need to have those. As a salesperson, I don't expect in cybersecurity, I do not expect you to be the expert, right? Because you're not, right? You're the salesperson. I hope you have a sales engineer right behind you who's really good at what they're doing and can really delve a layer deeper into that, but also have things like white papers out there that discuss that. It not only describes the environment and the ecosystem where your product goes into and hopefully places it appropriately in that ecosystem. So it describes exactly where your solution fits. But also, you know, gives enough detail to say, hey, you guys really understand this space, right? You guys understand the challenges of it and everything else. It really establishes that, again, that trust from hey, I trust that individual, I trust that company that they're telling me here's how it goes. Adds that bona fides that you understand things are going on there.
Do you look to the SE, the system engineer, sales engineer for that? Or do you find that some organizations have solution architects, security architects that can look at the organizational level, not just the operational level?
Yeah, you're going to get a little bit of both. I'd say from both sides, it's a little bit of a push and a pull. I've seen a lot of sales folks who come in and say, yeah, I'd like to spend 30 minutes with you telling me, you know, what your current challenges are for 2024. I'm like, I'm a security guy. I don't typically go out saying, here's exactly the holes I have in my architecture and how I think I need to fill them. That's not a very good approach to that, right? You're going to get rebuffed, or they're politely just going to throw you off with things, right? They're not going to give you the full, right, here's exactly where all my problems are. You know, can you fill these gaps? Can you fill these holes? So definitely, I would say there's a little bit of push and pull. You know, if you have a large enough organization, yeah, absolutely. I need to have folks on staff who understand where my gaps are and can ask all those questions. But likewise, you need to have, from a vendor side, you need to have that sales engineer who can meet them halfway and who can answer them honestly and say, yeah, you know, you're going to get this out of it, but you're not going to get that out of it.
Yeah, and to put things in perspective, I mean, look, we're entering 2024 here. We're in 2024. 2023 arguably was one of the worst in cyber history as far as, you know, the reality that hit with the economy and everything else that went around it. But you know, if you have a new product or platform, or you're one of those 3,800 security vendors out there, it's difficult to make inroads into this community. It is. They're hard to get in touch with. They're completely overwhelmed. And many companies are simply expanding their existing footprints and their existing platforms versus looking at new technologies. That's why it's great to hear stories of, like, you know, New Tech Day, right? Someone taking time block for that. So bringing in a reputable sales or customer engineering leader is, I think, critical. It's where we see the most success. It's also one of the areas it's one of the reasons we're seeing such a huge increase in not only SEs, but kind of, let's call it CISO-like figures, and what we would call a field CISO or even a portfolio CISO. And I think it is a pretty loud and clear message to the community that, look, we're going to need folks that definitely know how to speak the language of the customer, externally facing. It used to be, when we first started our firm, it was maybe 5% of the searches that we had had a sales component effort or enablement scope percentage. And now that is definitely in the 25 to 30%. That's the externally facing, but you also need to know how to communicate with sales and other sales engineers as well. And so I think this cycle that we're seeing right now, this massive explosion of field CISOs, is really interesting. And it really stems from all these products that are out there that are fairly complex. They're fairly point solutions. Maybe some of them have a robust platform, but this is here to stay. I mean, for any CISO that's wondering, should I be focused on a little bit of customer enablement? Yes, you should. You're going to have to sell your own posture. You're going to have to listen to other people's postures. You're going to have to do it all. So I'm glad they were talking about sales engineering, and that there's a bigger sort of gravitational pull that's going on here as well.
Yeah, and one of the things that I would recommend for all those folks is be ready with referrals.
Yeah.
And I would say that when I say be ready, I mean already have them in hand when you walk in to go sell your product, right? Because we've already mentioned that behind the scenes CISO to CISO side of things, right? We all talk, we all communicate with each other, and trust me, I'm constantly I get messages from all of my peer group that says, "Hey, is anybody using this?" I get them through the ISACs, right? People were like, "Hey, anybody else using this capability? Can you tell me how easy it was to implement?" Things like that. So if you're ready with white papers and referrals, those referrals to say this other customer has implemented our solution, right? Obviously you want to stilt it. They've had a good experience with it, right? They've implemented it, it's successful, and they're willing to talk to you. And then it's a peer-to-peer talking about, hey, we implemented it. It was, was seamless. It worked great. Here are a few things to think through. Nothing's ever 100% rosy, right? We all know that. So it's okay, be ready for those types of things. Have those referrals up front. So ask your customers after you've done a good install in places, and somebody you don't mind being, to some extent, a proxy spokesman for your product. Ask them if they'd be willing to take a call from somebody else considering buying.
Yeah, there's no shortcut, right? I think that's what you're trying to say. Is like there's no silver bullet. There's no. I mean, I'm so old that I remember the sales guys in my original storage enterprise storage company getting leads off the fax machines, right? So, so I won't go into how embarrassingly old that is, but mid 90s, that's what you did, right? And you still had to build that relationship. You still had to figure out a way to earn that trust, to show value, to understand their problems. And it's tough. It's tough in this environment. It's much more crowded. The CISOs are much better blockers. They are really, what people don't realize is that CISOs are extraordinarily good at blocking out the noise. Extraordinarily, that they watched CIOs do it for so long, and they're like, we can teach a master's class in that now, right? And so yeah, you have to figure out how to get through. It's not easy, for sure.
Yeah, I'd have to do those things, or I'd spend my whole day weeding out, what's this. What do I need to deal with versus what are all these emails versus the phone calls versus everything else? There's no way you can survive. You'd waste a lot of time. To your point, I guess, kind of to tie a bow on this, I would absolutely say it's back to that relationship, building the trust. You are in a marathon here. This is not a quick sprint, right? To build that relationship, to build that trust, it's going to take a little bit of time. Use your peer group. Get involved in the community so that you're not just a face that's out there hawking a product. You're somebody who really cares about this. You're somebody who's invested in it. I've seen a ton of that. And quite frankly, I'd go to those folks first when I'm looking for a solution.
I want to ask you, Don, how much do you expect somebody coming to you, how much do you expect that they know about you and your organization, your operation, as well as the potential threats that you face? Because I've seen many a pitch deck that, I don't know, the first 5+ slides are setting the stage for the problem, which every time I see that, I figure people like you know that already.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And
Don't spend a lot of time on that.
Yeah. And then there's the transition to, we're going to guess at what that looks like in your environment. So I want to understand what you expect in that kind of phase there.
Yeah, I think two techniques are effective for that. One is every cybersecurity salesperson should have a one-pager. I know this is going to be difficult to get past the marketing department, but a one-pager that speaks in plain English of exactly what your product is and what it does and what type of place, what architectures it fits into. Work hard to get that through and approved, right? With less buzzwords, right? We're all tired of hearing them. Get rid of all of that and show me a diagram and give me outline on it does the following things. I'll be happy. The second part of that, I would say, is give examples in the industry. Sorry. So if you're trying to sell to financial services, say here's, because you don't know how, if I'm cold calling Huntington or I'm cold calling some other bank, I don't know what their architecture is, right? As a salesperson, you'd be a lot better off to say, here's how we think this fits into the financial sector. Here's how we think it fits into health, right? And those types of things. So you come with your pitch deck, which is predominantly focused upon those industries, because, there are clearly differences in how they've implemented things, systems they have, how they operate. But in general, they've all got kind of the same types of problems and the same types of issues, especially if they're a regulated industry, because that'll drive them kind of to some common architecture and some common things there. So those are the two things that I would give you that really help out with that. That one pager that's plain English without the word salad, because we're horrible, and I'd say that on both sides, right? CISOs, gosh, yeah. I lived in the government for 30 years. I thought I knew acronyms, right? Because the government was a master at it. And then I exited and went to a bank, and I'm like, holy cow, you guys are worse. I'm like, this is amazing. You guys have come up with your own, AML, BSA, and bank secrecy act.
I'm glad you brought that up, Don. And part of my role here in these sessions is, advocating, but also, I guess, pushing the CISO community to also think about things on their side. And I'm glad you brought up the word salad. I don't know how many resumes I've looked at just this week that had a grouping in the middle of every technology that the CISO has they've been exposed to, right? We're not going to go through each one and figure out the depth, nor should any company do that during the interview process. But one for vendors specifically, I might recommend, because you are going to need this for interviewing at some point, is for CISOs to also come up with a one pager as to what, nothing confidential, but just, products that they use or technologies they use in each parts of the stack, in each part of security operations and application security and compliance, because it'll make the conversations a lot more efficient with vendors, with partners. When you get to your interview, you don't have to explain, when did I use Palo Alto Networks versus CrowdStrike? It's too hard. And also the audience doesn't really understand it as much, right? So you're trying to explain a technology that you use in one area, and it's actually, a platform you use for all the areas. That's difficult to explain in a 2-minute session. So just, for CISOs to be more concise about that as well will help this become a more efficient process overall, in my opinion. And I've seen a few of them do that already, which is great.
Yeah, and please, I hope whoever's watching this, and if you're in sales, I hope you don't think I'm bashing on the cybersecurity sales industry. I just think, quite frankly, on both sides of this fence, we can both do better. Yeah. Us and them.
Us and them. Let's shift. We have a few minutes left, and we save some bashing for the board. I'm joking, of course. Nice. But so now you're speaking to your peers. Well, we can extend it to the ELT, executive leadership team, if we want, but focus in on the board. How does a CISO? We're talking about technologies and controls and audits and all this stuff, and talking to salespeople and reading emails, and then the other end of the spectrum, translating all of that to a board. So yeah. let's go there now.
Yeah, there's some common pieces there, though, and again, I think goes back to it's about building a relationship to some extent. If you can, right? If you have that opportunity. I've been lucky to work at a few places where I could establish a relationship with a board. First and foremost, though, even if you can't establish that relationship, know who you're working with, right? Know who's on your board. You research their bios, know where they've worked before. Boy, I would focus in on it as a CISO. And I'd look at the board members like, all right, which one of these people has been a CIO before, right? That's somebody I want to pay attention to. They know the tech side of things. They're going to be asking me some tough questions. And I want to make sure I satisfy all of their questions on that. because you do probably on a board especially have a wide variety. There's a big spectrum of folks, and all of them probably very smart people, but some of them are more focused on finance, some of them more focused on sales and marketing, some of them clearly focused on the tech side of things. As a CISO, you want to pay attention to those committees that you'll have to be part of, or you'll have to give presentations to, whether it's a tech committee or a risk committee, those types of folks. So you want to make sure you know who's on that committee or who's on the board, so you can understand where they're coming from when they ask you those questions. Do your homework, right? You're probably not going to find out a lot on board members from LinkedIn, but generally your company will give you bios on each and every one of those. I actually worked for a company at one point that actually sent you to dinner with the board as the CISO. So you had a chance to sit down and eat a meal with these folks, and they get to know you beyond the, hey, yeah, I'm going to grill you during the committee session. I'm going to ask you lots of questions. But they wanted to understand a little bit more about you. It's a little bit more about building that relationship and, again, building the trust. So please do that. If you can meet outside of a board meeting and get to know them a little bit better, do that. That's definitely within whatever the tolerance of the company that you're working for. You have to kind of ferret that out yourself on that side. I've actually worked before with folks where the board members, they had my cell phone. They'd call me. In fact, that's how I got that call at one point to say, hey, could you talk to this other CISO over there? I'm on another board and they're having problems. Could you talk to them about, what's going on over there, and maybe offering some assistance or ideas?
Yeah, I'll echo that real briefly in that, as a CISO, if you're reporting to the board or you hope to be a board member as a CISO someday, I mean, that you have to remember why the relationship needs to exist there, right? You are by far and away probably the most effective translator of risk to business terms in the organization, right? They know that. You have an unselfish approach to narrating that risk and on behalf of the company and the betterment for the company. You're a good listener, right? You look for solutions. If you understand the core principles of why the relationship should exist, then you'll find genuine ways to build relationships with those individuals, and offering time every month on text or cell phone as to why, and how you can help through these situations. You are brought in as the expert to tell them what they need to know. As board members, a very different view of the organization. They're not in the day-to-day, you are, but you have to balance that communication. So we've talked about communication aboard a lot in this session and others, but I think people lose sight of that quite often, is that it really is about that relationship, to your point. Very, very important.
Yeah. The one word of caution I will give CISOs in that establishing that relationship is, you do need to make sure your current leadership, and different companies have different reporting structures for CISOs. I've worked before where it was probably 2 or 3 people between me and the CEO. And then I've worked for companies where I worked for the CEO as the CISO. All those folks between you and that board need to be comfortable with you having an open dialogue and an open line of communication between that, right? So that's another area I would just say you need to pay attention to and make sure that they're comfortable with it, right? If you work in an organization where you have 4 layers between you and the board, and every board meeting they make you go through a process by every one of those levels, reviews your slides and edits it before it gets to the board, you probably don't want to have a super open dialogue with those board members, right? Direct line of communication. They clearly have given you the signal that they want the ability to shape that message when it goes to the board. So just a word of caution. A couple other things, though, that I think actually mirror what we talked about on the sales side of things. Avoid the jargon, the cybersecurity jargon. I think, Michael, you mentioned it before about translating that risk for board level. You need to also be able to translate sometimes some of these very difficult technical conversations and cybersecurity concepts to a board who may not have that background. Always try, and I know we get kind of in our own headspace as CISOs, always try to make it about the business, though. Put it in business context. If at all possible, I really wish, we get to the maturity on the cybersecurity side where we are true boiling it down to dollars and cents. even if it's if we're not a profit center, even if we're an expense on that side, that's one way to look at it. You're an expense, right? What are we spending? But you need to be able to translate that from a risk perspective. Yeah, here are the risks we're mitigating. Here, and you have to describe those sometimes to the board so they understand. Yeah, your manufacturing line is entirely computer controlled, it's automated, and we want to make sure that network and those systems don't get infiltrated with malware or ransomware because you'll be down. And you've already done the homework. You know what a day down in that plant looks like, right? And you can easily translate that to them to say, here's what it is in dollars and cents.
Yeah. I will say, just from my view, that this is one area that I would give CISOs a pat on the back for, in that it's the one thing I feel the business has not really given enough credit to CISOs, given the historical context here. So in the last 5 to 8 years, and I'm a history major, so I always look at it from that way, but it is very unlikely to find another group of individuals, especially technical executives, that have come so far in where their scope started. I mean, let's remember where this all started not too long ago and where we are today from a scope and the responsibility. Everything has changed. The role has completely done a 180, right, as far as where it was and where it is now. I think CISOs have done a really nice job. They're not perfect by any stretch, but they've done a really nice job actually codifying that risk, putting it into digestible format for the board to really take action on. Sure, tons of improvement needs to be made, but given that they had very little time and very little direction and mentorship, find me the percentage of companies that actually mentor their CISOs from an executive programming perspective. It's super small. So I think they've done a really nice job, and they're on the right path. So I do want to recognize them for that. I think CISOs get a lot of crap for not being a great board-facing role. Like, well, let's look at other ones and compare it. Look at other executives and compare it. I think the CISOs have done a pretty fine job in that, and are on the right
short
path.
time period.
Very short time.
Because I kind of liken it to, we used to be as CISOs, we were technology executives, right? We were kind of like a CIO or somebody in that space. One of their peers, and quite frankly, where I think we need to head, and some have made that, but I think it's slowly transitioning to the business executive. You're just a business executive with a very different portfolio than some of your product lines at a business. So, I think if you communicate well, especially around events that happen and board notification for those, always make sure you're involving your legal counsel, make it about the facts, work on your metrics, because really that's what boards want to see. They want to digest that. And usually most boards get a deck well before the meeting and they're trolling through it. You want to make that as digestible and understandable without your voice track as possible. Yeah. So we're really evolving, and I think we're making good progress, but we got a little ways to go still.
On the metric side, Don, I guess, not to put you on the spot, but do you have a favorite metric to measure or something that you like to talk to the board about that really kind of hits home in your experience?
Well, I'll tell you, the one they always focus on is events. If you can digest those down into cybersecurity events or something like that. Do I think it's entirely useful? I think it's only useful in one avenue. Is, if you've done a good job of putting together your threat matrix, which talks about all the threats you believe are going to come out for your business, then usually your events that happen probably give credibility to a lot of those things you had on your threat matrix. Mm-hmm. They want to know, well, wait a minute, how many events? What happened? Are those growing over time? How did we deal with them? Who all did we bring in? And the one thing I think a lot of boards will press you on is, wait a minute, did you escalate that to the appropriate level, right? Did it go to the CEO? Did it go to the board if that was necessary, right? And of course now, and you mentioned it, I think, or Sean mentioned at the beginning of the call with some of the new government regulation side of things, that's incredibly important to make sure we're doing right.
And I wanted to ask you, Don, about anticipation, because board members talk to each other, right? And CISOs talk to each other. So there's the community on both sides of that. And when the board's talking to each other, they're hearing about, to your point, a breach, some event hitting, some threats or attacks hitting a particular industry. And you may or may not be aware of that. So can you anticipate some of those things coming? And then you might also get questions of, well, how do we compare to others in our in our sector, and that's where I think maybe some of your community stuff might come in handy. So it's around anticipation. How do you anticipate and how do you prepare for some of those things that aren't part of your deck, but are most likely going to come up?
As a CISO, you should be absolutely prepared for whatever the headline was, right? That said so-and-so got breached, how did it happen, those types of things. And most CISOs generally are pretty aware of that because quite frankly, they're probably just like me. As soon as that happens, I'm doing I hate to say my own version of ambulance chasing, but I'm doing I feel bad for them. I hope that didn't happen. And by all means, I think sometimes we get away from the fact that we're all victims of this and we start victim shaming, but I won't go there. I think we as CISOs need to understand, how did this happen, right? What were the vectors? Who was the threat actor? Can I learn from this so that I can avoid it myself? Those board members are trying to do the same thing. They may not formulate it in the same words, but they want to know, wait a minute, they got breached over here. Could that happen to us? Right? What were the problems? So you need to be absolutely prepared for, especially the big name ones, the large ones. They probably aren't going to, if it hits CNBC, you're probably going to have to answer to it on that side of things. So I would absolutely be prepared there for those. You will get some off the wall questions too as well. And the one thing I've always focused on, which I don't think most companies do well, is cybersecurity of board members, right? Generally, we give them crappy applications that aren't controlled by the rest of your business stack. We need to do better in that space too as well, I would say.
Just a few bits of sensitive information in those board apps.
Yeah, just a little bit. And by the way, this whole concept, again, an additional scope that was not here just 6, 7, 8 years ago, which is the focus of the CISO being the chief look around the corner officer. So, I mean, their main job is to articulate a very clear and digestible story around aiming, to make sure you're protecting your customers, your data, and your employees. But it also is, what are the vulnerabilities coming? And they expect you to know that answer. Whatever is on their mind, whatever AI story they're reading in the paper that day.
Yep.
There was just a massive announcement on LifeLock I saw of all these records taken in the black market. So, I mean, we should be prepared. I have to be prepared for that, and I'm not a CISO, so I totally understand. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think again, I think we've come a long way. I think we have a lot of there aren't a ton of CISOs out there, but I think the ones that we have out there, the experienced ones, really have come a long way, and they are that business executive now who's having mature dialogue and discussion. They are to some extent translating for their boards. I think we need to get better. A whole nother topic that maybe is another day is CISOs on boards, because you're starting to see that with some of the legislation, but that's another topic, I guess.
Yeah. I agree, though. I think overall, it's actually been a relief to see that most boards are actually surprised about how well versed the CISO is on the business side. I rarely hear, they're hesitant because there's a reputation that comes with a CISO. But once they start interacting with several on their board, they are very surprised, often pleasantly surprised, about how well versed they are and how well of a business leader they are versus just someone that's looking at code analysis and endpoint issues, right? So I think that's a good thing. I think we're well on our way. We've paved, and honestly, Don, it's because of good folks like you in the industry that have really been that mentor, and many others that have kind of led to that. Led to that channel. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think that's a great point to say one more, well, maybe two more thank yous. Thank you, Don, for sharing your insights here. And thank you, Michael, for co-hosting and bringing Don to us here to have some fun. Definitely tons of points for CISOs to take with them and absorb, and salespeople as well. And hopefully there's some boards members listening too, so they know what the CISO has to deal with as they're approaching them, and maybe even invite a few CISOs out that from the companies that they represent as a board member. So, Michael, final thoughts? Want to close this out?
No, just thanks for having me. Everyone have a safe new year, and be good to yourselves. That's all. That's my advice for today. So
there you go. Perfect. Well, thanks, Don. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everybody, for listening and watching. Of course, many more coming from Michael and I on the CISO Circuit series here on Redefining Cybersecurity podcast. And please do subscribe, share, and comment if you have thoughts. What do you think of all of Don's points and my stupid comments and Michael's insights on what it means to get hired as a good CISO? So thanks, everybody. See you on the next one.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and this story made you think, then share ITSP Magazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our columns. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.